Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Co-Creating with AI. I'm Martin, and with me today, as always, is Rasmus. How are you today, Rasmus?
Good. Had a nice day, focus, and now I'm in the new podcast room at the co-working space where I'm at. How are you?
Awesome. We're in really good. It's a sort of a gray autumn day, but I'm hyper focused at work indoors, so that's always good. And we're recording this in the afternoon. It's starting to get dark in the afternoons here in Sweden.
Yeah, yeah. It's like 4 o'clock. It's probably dark outside now.
Yes, and today we're going to talk about how to allow generated AI to be more stable and robust and not hallucinate and so on. How to use your data to best generate good result out of your AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic, and there's so many different techniques running around, right? So maybe we can tie it to like real world use case that we've tried or that we've seen.
Mhm.
But I think just to add on to like the frame of today's talk, where I'm curious at least, is okay, so we have these smart models, right? And if you ask it to produce something for you, it will be, you know, not really using knowledge in a sense, right? It will just do next word prediction based on all the data it's trained on. It will, likely hallucinate, and that's where the tasks where people have found it to be very useful. But it will be quite generic. So I think something that's come up for me a lot, talking with our pilot customers who are mainly like marketing brand content agencies, a few bigger ones, and in-house marketing teams that want to kind of use AI in a more systematic way to
Mm.
produce content and run their workflows. And one thing that's come up again and again now is how to produce higher relevance. And
Mm.
the relevance is, of course, based on some type of content, some type of input data, and I'll give examples, but and then also context. So something that's proven quite valuable for our initial customers is to say have some kind of input data, some research. It could be some previous blog posts of a client, and then
Mm.
some context, which is a brand voice. Could be a file, could be something they generate inside of Multiply based on previous content that the client has produced, and then use that context to then write relevant content based on the previous content, like new blog posts based on the previous ones, but also in the style of this brand voice. So
Mm.
it's consistent with, a good output. And this has been quite an interesting thing where we've discovered that using, like, if you don't differentiate between these two, like what is content to be used as a basis for generation and what is context, which is kind of like, um, I don't want to generate content based on the brand voice, but I want it to follow the brand voice. And so that's the distinction we're using internally, at least.
Mm.
We've seen that you need to be like quite specific, especially when handling big amounts of data and compressing it like we do when it's kind of outside of the context window of the AI models that we use inside of Multiply.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I could dive deeper in there, but like that distinction has really been something like that's been a major realization for us, and actually has um, made us do some rework of how we handle big amounts of data when the client
Mm.
puts in like a lot of data that they want to use either content or context, or especially in combination, some data as content and some as context. Uh, but it seems to be working well, but that distinction has been like really really like
Yeah.
important for us to sort of dive into to get like valuable workflows with relevant output.
And another example of when the AI happens to confuse different parts of the context that I sometimes run into is because another part of the context window is the instructions that you give. And so in your example, what I hear is that you're talking about an example where you say, use these facts, the content to, and with this brand voice as an example to generate a blog post. It's sort of a way like, to follow, and you expect the AI to follow instructions and not get confused. And sometimes what I do is that I ask the AI improve on these instructions for how to write the blog post. And then, and like, if you don't phrase it right and very clear about what you want, it starts following the instructions that you're asking it to improve instead of improving on them. So that's also like it. And then you have to tweak it a bit, just how you lay it out in the context window in order to for it to understand properly. And it's these are just examples of how fuzzy it can be to talk to an LLM and to a generative AI, and how difficult it actually is to build production um, like quality based on LLM, because they are sort of chaotic based on input.
Yeah, and it's interesting that actually what you said is quite close to like how we've solved it now in Multiply, which is that you can't provide any data to the AI without very clearly specifying what it is and also an instruction of how it's to be used.
Mm,
So, for example, if I link some previous blog posts, we need to specify that these previous blog posts are to be used as content. We want to produce something that is a good follow up to these blog posts.
mm,
And also, this is my idea for the next blog post, or maybe we generate the idea for them.
mm,
And this brand voice that is linked is to be used as a context in the sense that please write in the style of this brand voice.
mm,
And when you have these like complex multi-layer workflows, which we tend to build for our clients, because that's where we really add value on top of like differential value to like ChatGPT, is that if that is not like very clearly set up, you can't have reliable workflows, because you'll get something like that looks like it's going to be good, or that looks relevant, or that looks like high quality, but when you look into it, it's not.
mm,
So it's and especially when you start handling like bigger amounts of data, then you really need to be careful when you compress it. That, for example, if you have a huge brand voice from a client, then that you have a file for, then you can't compress it in a way that destroys the style of the brand voice, because then
no,
it's no longer a brand voice, which
mm,
is what tends to happen. For example, if you just write a summary, if you just summarize it, it won't necessarily be a summary that captures the style of the brand voice. So
no,
it's yeah, that's at least our insight right now, that unless you're really clear to the AI about how to use and like each data point that it gets, or each source, then it's going to use it in the wrong way,
mm,
because it sort of defaults to using everything as content almost, because that's what it's doing. It takes a blob of words and then it tries to predict the next word. So
mm.
that's kind of what we're discovering. Does that relate to like what you're like seeing as well?
Yeah. Um, and it also reminds me of this um, distinction we talked about way back, maybe 10 episodes ago, about what is fine tuning versus what is context management. And that in the scenario you describe, it's also very clear to me that what what you could do is to fine tune, uh, if you don't need GPT-4, which of course you often do, but if you can work with an AI that you can fine tune, which is GPT 3.5 or one of the Llama LLMs and also on the open source, from the open source world, then you can fine tune it for style, and then and then fill the context window with the facts it should base the blog post on. So, and it's very clear that the opposite wouldn't work, like fine tuning it for facts and then filling the context with the style is much less of a good match, because fine tuning is all about how do I write something, and it's less about what exactly do I write. And fine tuning for storing facts is a lousy method of storing those. It becomes very fuzzy. But there are also like a really new interesting product or project coming out of Berkeley, which is called an MGPT, which is an a version of RAG, like retrieval augmented generation, where you, instead of feeding the AI, you allow the AI to actually pull data in. So to basically, when AI wants to reason about something, it can make a plan saying that I want to retrieve these pieces of content from my memory, and then later it can actually also store. It can reason in its plan of execution. I want to store these other parts that
Mm.
I have now generated, and I think it's very early research. It just like all the agent system that are running around and being very. It's very easy to like run them 5 times and get a nice demo one of the times that you can record and put on Twitter, and it's very difficult to get them to produce consistent quality. And I think it's for a while now it will probably be the same with lots of these advanced memory techniques that it's difficult to get consistent results.
That's actually pretty interesting to me. So the way I understand that is, and why fine tuning on style works is because if you just have enough data in the correct style to fine tune it on, say, Shakespeare's collected works,
Mm,
then probabilistically, which is like how it generates output, right? It's gonna be trained on that style, and that's how it's like how it will match. But training it on facts, then you still have kind of a probabilistic situation where it might use that knowledge that it's trained on in a correct way or in a hallucinatory way, right?
yeah, yeah.
uh, and that sort of pulls me to that currently the only way to get like relevant, is what I call it, output,
Mm,
factual, you might say, is to provide very clearly the data, which is the knowledge and the
mm,
facts. And the experiment that you, or the research project that you mentioned, that's basically saying, hey, can we also remove the human from the loop there, so
mm,
that instead of me having to pick the data that I feed in, we can actually just give it access to all of the data, and
mm,
then allow it to pick whatever it wants from there, but it's picking from the knowledge base, so to say, from the facts. Is that like
mm.
the way they use it? Is that
Yeah,
like, to understand it? Yeah.
yeah. And it is sort of it's like the original Bing, which is retrieving facts from its big web index to use for replying. And it's a bit like I think Perplexity AI does the same with their Copilot, where you can, if you enable Copilot when you ask it things, it will both use the files that you upload. You can upload PDFs or text files, and it will also go look on the web for relevant text on the web. And you can also set it to a context. If you say that this is, I'm going to ask about academic research now, then it will only search for academic papers. But it's a very powerful way of allowing the AI to construct its own context to respond to a query.
Yeah, and I mean, so that's like outsourcing, kind of finding the data and
Hmm.
then deciding what parts of that data is relevant to the task at hand, right? But then
Mm.
there's also the point that at least what we're working towards is, and what I know, like a bunch of the kind of no code tools out there when you can train your own chatbot, etc., is you provide the data, you provide,
Yeah,
say, the documentation for your customer service bot,
as a
or
user, yeah.
for all these niche co-pilots that are, you know have this specific knowledge,
Mm.
and then it can search within that, right,
Mm.
in order to answer the questions. As long as the data set is good, then for performing the task at hand, as long as the knowledge is there, then the AI can do that. But
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, have you got a sense? Because from some of these like open source projects, I'm not sure if LangChain did it, but I think at least like AutoGPT and Baby AGI did it. Is they removed kind of vector databases as the default thing because they
Mm.
thought that it wasn't necessary. I think we touched upon this before, but like, do you know enough about that, like, to relate it to what we're talking about now?
I think it depends on how much data you have, if and the nature of that data. Vector database is great if you have lots and lots of unstructured text that you need to retrieve from. Then often a vector database with semantic search can be the only way to retrieve it. But what the um, yeah, like AutoGPT and the agent systems, they often are not dealing with that much content. They are dealing with more like maybe they start with allowing the AI to just write one file, or they upload a few PDFs, and
Mm.
at that point you can easily just go through them. And I don't know if that's what they're doing, but that's and you can store text files and just bring the entire text file up into context when it's needed again.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I wonder, like, if we project this a bit like out, where do you think like this will be in a year or two? Do you know what I mean? If we just project it out and let's think about the situation where it's about a lot of data,
Yeah.
right? Let's just imagine that, because I think if it fits within the context window, it's just a matter of serving that data to the AI in a
Mm.
good way. But whereas when you have, whether it's structured or unstructured data, when you have a lot of data, and you want the AI to kind of be able to perform whatever task you have at hand, analysis or research or content creation, then based on that data, then and we'd take this like a little bit further. Where do you think this will go?
First of all, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that the next version of ChatGPT will actually have some kind of vector database in the on the back end for the user to store documents. It's starting to be the uniqueness that other chatbots and AI generative AI services that is multimodal or text based, that the edge they have on ChatGPT is that OpenAI's chat interface is so it's so mindful, it's so in the moment, doesn't have a memory at all.
Hmm.
But and the data is right there. Like you have the big chat history. If just with a flip of a switch, you could allow it to like retrieve whatever is relevant from your earlier conversations. So it makes so much sense that you would add that, and in not in 2 years, but in a few months, I would guess. But looking further out, what I feel is the natural way to go is to have um, part of the context is needs to be managed by the human, especially the instructions, and these are the facts and so on to based on. But that the part of the context window that is managed by any kind of automation, be it like a web query or the AI itself and so on, that's going to be more and more refined. There are two additional facts that we have to take into consideration. Like there's the research going on expanding context windows, and we have these like Claude 2 with 100k tokens context windows, and that's also part of the solution, maybe not, because the precision is worse, and the actually data computation, like the compute you need to throw in, is accelerating like exponentially, because when you have a context window, it needs to measure the attention mechanism in the transformer needs to measure every part of the context against all other parts. So
Hmm.
inside like on the back end, inside the AI computation, what happens is that the context window is actually squared. If you provide a long context window, it's also as high. If it's 100k tokens long, it's also 100k tokens high, and all of that needs to be computed, like all the correlances within it. So that's one fact. The other one, like factor playing in, is that hallucinations are not always unwanted. If we ask the AI, can you come up with suggestions for a domain name for my startup? You actually want it to be hallucinating. Hallucinating is a very negatively loaded word, but generative AI, like generative is the neutral word for the same thing basically. And we want some things to be generated from facts, and some things to be actually made up in the moment. If you want new domain names, or if you want just like write a poem about this situation, I want to give my daughter a birthday poem about how she is doing well in school or something. Then you want the AI to be super creative. And there, I think we are also seeing development in terms of just how do we prompt the AI, and how perhaps do we fine tune LLMs in order to understand prompts differently. So what we talked about with before about fine tuning an AI to style and then feed it with content, we could also fine tune it to instructions to understand the difference.
Mm. So basically, looking ahead, we like the thesis is, if I'm going to understand you correctly, is like we're not going to be able to move the human completely out of the loop for a long time, because we still need, the intent, right? We talked about these
Yeah.
paradigms of UI, right? We are
Yeah.
in the intent based paradigm, and we need to provide the intent, and the intent is best described, right now at least, in words, right? An instruction
Mm,
prompt, as it's called. And without clearly instructing these models, like, you're not going to get the result you want. And that could of course be, if you have a very specific purpose that you like, a very specific instruction that you fine tune it on,
mm,
that's one way to do it. Or a set of instructions, or a set of understanding instructions, which can then, of course, create ease of use in a UI, because you
mm,
don't have to put that burden on the user. um, but then also with these, and with that, what is the kind of output I want? Is it creative, generative, or is it factual, right?
yeah.
And this we're already seeing in some of the no code tools. But
Mm,
then with regards to memory and data, uh, it will also probably be a combination of kind of like, I'm providing the information that I believe or know to be relevant. And then I can also, the AI can complement that by, say, semantically searching a large amount of unstructured documents that we have in the company,
mm.
and finding what is relevant, right? Mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty nice to see that. It almost seems like there's not like that much innovation needed, like leaps to go, like to make these models vastly more useful. It's more like engineering now in product.
Yeah.
uh, like it's so funny how like transformers, like just throwing compute and data on the transformer model, was the leap that might be enough for, um, for us to get so far, right? Some even
Mm,
think that we might get to, the AGI and that things, but just because we've mimicked a neural net, right? And if
mm.
we just feed it more knowledge, then we're going to get there. But
Yeah.
mm, so you seen any like any and is there anything that has come up other than this, any products or anything that have like really piqued your eye in like this path forward towards, I guess, um, much more useful, like the next level of usefulness of these models? Is there anything that you've been looking at?
Yes. So there's one more challenge which is approaching, which is also a lot of research and development going into, which is that when these AIs are going to become mainstream, it means that you can no longer sort of trust the human part of the context. The human input can no longer be trusted if you turn it over to public use. If you allow public use of an AI LLM, then instruction following, like really highly resilient and robust instruction following, is needed, and like very strong guardrails, because you could have users with malicious intent that want to make fun of, or actually like jailbreak the AI to tell them business secrets, like what is your prompt, or what are algorithms are running inside you. And it could both be, it turns out, like carefully constructed instructions that the user gives the AI. So when the AI asks, like, how can I help you, in if you have a government service, instead of asking a question, the user might like have constructed a big prompt that is made to extract or like turn over the AI into different mode than was what was intended. Another thing that turns out to be also a vulnerability is that if there are mechanical jailbreaks that, so for example with chat GPT, if you feed GPT 3.5 1000 letter A's, what comes back will be a complete hallucination, which is completely random, as if it's like reset into like in like just working from some primordial soup inside its brain. And so people are having fun with this, but there's also really serious research on like that, even like it's unknown actually, because you can't, it's impossible to try an infinite amount of inputs. It's unknown if there is a like a findable like mechanical jailbreak for a certain LLM that we just haven't found yet.
Mm.
And until you've found it, you need to instead have a very you need to have guardrails, which is like a standard classical algorithm that first inspects the user input to say, to see, is this a valid user input? Is it reasonable for our use case? And which will reject like 1,000 A's coming in a row.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I just think that feeds back to like the topic of this podcast, which is like, at least in my mind, if you train a model on some kind of data, theoretically that data could be output. You know, the AI could output that. So the only way to, you know, for that not to happen is to not have that data in the model,
Yeah, yeah.
and for that data not to be available
Mm,
to a model used by someone who shouldn't. So it comes back a lot, I think. We've talked with clients about this as well, and we is kind of like, how can we feel safe
mm,
putting confidential data into these models?
mm,
Like, how can we feel safe? And I think like part of my answer to that is, as long as it's not in the model, no one else can get it,
yeah,
right? And as long as it's not, the models are not trained on that. So in our case, for example, when we, you know, feed data into OpenAI via API, then they don't train their model on that. That's at least the guarantee they give publicly, and I think we can trust that.
yeah.
Uh, so then it again comes back to, okay, we have all these data, right? And how do we efficiently get our AI assistant to utilize that, right?
Mm,
So I think that's why, like, I don't know, one frame of this, and I'm not sure if this is correct, but what comes up now is kind of like, we have quite a significant amount of intelligence in, say, GPT-4 already,
mm,
and these other models are catching up, I think. And I think really this is kind of one of the biggest potential improvements is, you know, apart from people kind of training, fine tuning their own models and keeping them, you know, locked in the house.
mm,
How do, you know, companies take advantage of all the innovation on kind of the foundational model layer? And I think a lot of that comes down to, how do I provide my content and context to these models without, you know, compromising the integrity or security of it.
yeah.
So I really like, and we've seen so much innovation just during the last, you know, 6 months and last year with vector databases and everything, right? But it's going to be very, very, very interesting to, I mean, hopefully be part of that as well, like in our own
Mm,
work, but also to see kind of the best practices that emerge for different use cases.
mm,
So yeah, I'm happy to have explored that a little bit with you today, and
yeah.
I'm quite excited to sort of keep digging there.
Yeah, I think that um, this is the bleeding edge of AI research right now. Like, how do we actually use the context window to our maximum? Because we, as product builders, we just leave the like building foundation models is something, not something that I spend time on. I just trust that there's a lot of innovation going on, but I feel that I have a lot of things to contribute to how do we use them? How do we put them into a production use case in a robust and resilient way?
Yeah, maybe a good point to end on there.
Yes.
Yeah, It's been fun. Hopefully, it's been fun to the listener as well when we geek out on on these different kind of more or less technical and missionary aspects of it.
Yes. So thank you so much, Rasmus, and thank you, reader, for our listeners to stay with us all the way to the end. And as always, get in touch if you want to suggest or ask questions that we can bring up in future episodes. And this has been Co-Creating with AI. See you next time.
See you, Martin.